The great thing about success is that you're successful. The downside of success is that you have a lot of people who want to come and take a share of your success, right? And so we think a lot about what makes solidcore unique and how we continue to lean in on those things that make us unique.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Veneri. Today I'm joined by Bryan Myers, President and CEO of solidcore. Following up on our conversation from 2021, Bryan returned to the show to discuss L Catterton's recent majority investment in the brand, plans to scale from 135 locations to more than 250 studios, and his vision for setting a new standard for sustainable growth and boutique fitness. Let's get into it. The Fitt Insider Podcast is presented by EGYM. EGYM's smart fitness ecosystem is transforming healthcare through exercise. Combining strength equipment with AI-powered software and corporate wellness platform WellPass, it's leading the shift to proactive preventative health. Learn more about EGYM's intelligent workout solutions at egym.com. Hi, Bryan. Welcome back to the show. It's great to have you again.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be back.
Yeah, a lot has changed maybe in 3 years since we chatted last. Certainly getting back to, people being able to go to the gym, looking forward into the future in terms of not only the industry, but certainly for solidcore. And maybe the biggest development of all for you since then is an investment acquisition, majority investment from L Catterton. So what's the current state of solidcore and what's kind of top of mind now as you think about where the company stands and what's next?
Yeah, Joe, you're right. It is night and day since the last time we talked. So if anyone listening wants to take a fun trip down memory lane, episode number 94 is when Joe and I last spoke 3.5 years ago in 2021 in the depths of COVID. Maybe I'll just start by saying what solidcore is, because there may be some people who are listening who don't know what solidcore is. At solidcore, we operate a chain of fitness studios. They're all company owned. We operate about 135 of them across 27 states today. Our workout is a 50-minute full body workout that is resistance-based strength training designed to bring your muscles to that second stage of muscle failure where they are shaking uncontrollably. So we are in basically every major market in the United States and even some secondary and tertiary markets as well. So if you are anywhere in the US, look us up and come sweat under the blue lights. But Joe, to your very pointed question, yes, we are about 90 days into a brand new relationship with L Catterton, a leading global private equity firm based out of New York City. They acquired a majority stake in the business in the fall of 2024. And we couldn't be more thrilled to have them on board to sort of help us through this next chapter. While the business has been private equity backed now for well over 7 years, this is, I think, the start of a sort of fresh, exciting, new sort of entry point into the future of solidcore, where we're talking about taking this brand from, like I said, 135 units to 250 units and beyond, where we're talking about investing in partnerships and potentially partnering with athletes and taking the business international and some really, really exciting things that prior to this, the business was either too small or frankly didn't have the right resources and capabilities around the table to take on. But like I said, really excited about the partnership with L Catterton and the opportunities that will open up for us.
Yeah, obviously a super well-respected and expert in the fitness space, the broader kind of fitness and wellness category when we talk about L Catterton. The solidcore had previously, like you said, had been funded and backed. There's been other investors around the table. How did this relationship maybe come about, and why were they the right partner to think about, hey, what is the next kind of level for solidcore?
Yeah, so for those of you who may not be as familiar with kind of the private equity world, the way that it works is kind of once you start down the path of private equity, it's hard to kind of get outside of that ecosystem. And so, when our founder was running this business back in 2017, she decided that she wanted to grow faster. And because of that, she couldn't do it out of the cash flows of the business. And so she went out and partnered with a private equity firm out of Utah called Peterson Partners. They were in this business, invested from 2017 all the way through this most recent transaction and fully exited their position in 2024. But ultimately, what that means when you start to bring private equity in the mix is those folks have an obligation to their LPs or their limited partners, their funders, to provide them an investment return. And so Peterson, of course, after 3, 5, 7 years, needs to liquidate their position so that the people who invested in their fund can actually get their capital back. And so the reason that I bring this up is because some businesses, when they go out and they raise capital, the primary purpose to raise capital is actually to put cash on the balance sheet in order to be able to grow the business. We were very fortunate at solidcore that we were able to build a business over the years that was actually completely self-funding. And so the primary purpose of our transaction was really about shifting the ownership structure in the cap table in order to provide that liquidity for our previous private equity investors. And then also importantly, to make sure that we are leveling up the voices around the table that have more experience at the next level and size of growth that solidcore is going to. And so when we ran our process in 2024 and we thought about those two goals, of course, the person who can write the check that's the right size kind of accomplishes goal number one and allows our amazing previous partners to get the return that they need for their investors and as a thank you for their support of the business. But we really thought a lot about that question number two, which is where is the business going and who is the right partner who's going to bring the expertise, who's going to bring the know-how, who's been there and we can learn from to help sort of, again, avoid some of those roadblocks and take the business to the next level. And when you survey the landscape, Joe, you said it best, right? Like L Catterton is globally known for their work within the consumer space and specifically has really, really deep knowledge and experience investing behind the health and wellness sphere broadly and brick and mortar fitness specifically. And so we are really, really excited to have them around the table. Their operating expertise, again, they've seen this sort of story before. They know where some of the pitfalls are, and they're already being a super helpful value add partner to us as we think about tackling some of those opportunities that I articulated earlier.
Yeah, that's really helpful context. And I think a lot of times when folks are looking at different, whether it's, fitness brands, whether it's a health club, whether it's a gym like Equinox, which L Catterton has experience with, or, a franchise concept, which solidcore is not. So all corporate owned, locations. What does solidcore look like as a international global player, essentially doubling or at least, shooting for that goal in terms of scaling up? As you think about, okay, we go from 130 to, you said 250, probably maybe more. Where do you begin to construct that roadmap and where do you sit now relative to where you hope it can be?
Joe, I would start by saying, one of the reasons why we were excited about partnering with L Catterton is not only did they come with expertise that we thought was going to be helpful to us, but they also came with a perspective around the responsible way to grow this business. And importantly, that perspective was pretty firmly aligned with our perspective. And the reason that I start with that is to start by saying our playbook over the next few years is not going to look drastically different than what the business has been doing for the past several years, right? So, we've been growing this business at a pace of 25-ish studios a year. That's what we did in 2024. And we'll grow at a pace of 25 to 30 studios a year for the foreseeable future. And so growth in that way isn't going to look remarkably different in terms of unit count. I think what we will start to do, which I'm super excited about, is start to think about how we bring solidcore to communities that traditionally may not be the communities that sort of premium boutique fitness concepts look at. And so we have some exciting sort of test markets that we're launching this year, including places like Buffalo, New York, which, there really is no premium boutique fitness that has gone to Buffalo, New York. And we're really excited to prove that there are these pockets in all of these various markets where our consumer lives, works, and plays and is craving a brand like solidcore to come in and meet an unmet need. And so we'll do things like that, right? So like experiment with where the box can go. But then I think we'll also think about ways with them that we can get more out of all of our existing boxes, right? So like, how do we think about building a deeper relationship with our consumer? How do we think about anticipating what the consumer's needs are going to be? Whether that is like, how do we build a sort of better mousetrap, so to speak. Like, what are the workouts that we're doing, the exercises that we're incorporating? Are there different formats that we should be experimenting with on our schedule, again, to get more out of the box? And then there's going to be these like new sort of blue sky things that we're kind of working on in our test lab, which again, I won't ruin any surprises, but we have some really, really exciting partnerships that are coming up that are going to really change the way that I think our consumer has interacted with this category in particular. And I'll just tease it by saying, within kind of like the reformer-based workout or Pilates sort of category, there hasn't been a lot of data injected into the experience to tell you how your body might be sort of experiencing the work that you do within the studio or within sort of even a home environment. And I'm super excited about some of the work that we're doing on that front to bring some of that sort of data, some of the quantitative metrics to this modality that, like I said, haven't really been inserted to date.
You alluded to a lot of things a lot of questions that I wanted to ask there in terms of, when you think about expansion, there's expansion locations, but there's also extension in terms of like brand, where you want it to show up, how you want it to show up. One place that might go is like, hey, do you launch other modalities? Is there a, strength concept? Is there a hit concept? Is there a, you name it, sculpt? Do you go any different direction? Are you thinking about different? Would there be a different concept? No, this is purely the reformer experience that you know and love, and maybe we're going to do some things differently within that. So could you elaborate on like just how you even decide between kind of reinventing the wheel versus creating a better mousetrap, as you said?
It's a fantastic question. And, I was saying to you before we hit record that I went back and listened to our episode from 2021. And we actually talked a little bit about this very question, right? It was the idea of, is there a world in which solidcore is expanding into other modalities? And I will answer the question today in a very similar way that I answered it back then, which is to say that right now, our focus is on being the best at what we do today. And I see that as the future of solidcore at a minimum for the short and medium term, but potentially even for the long term. I think that there is, we are at a size and scale where it can be very easy to allow hubris to creep in. It can be very easy to get distracted by, oh, there's this element that's starting to pop in the consumer sort of psyche, or there's this element that's really, really popular. And we are kind of at a dangerous place where we have the sort of scale and resources where we could start to chase some of those things. And we have to be really, really, really selective and really think about like the bar that those opportunities have to clear before we actually start to go down the path. And what I would say today is none of those opportunities so far have cleared that bar. And what we are starting to see is our consumer is wanting more, not out of solidcore from a modality standpoint, but wanting more from what they're getting out of the experience that they're having within the box, right? So they're thinking about like, what are the ways that the workout is evolving to continue to challenge me? On one side of the spectrum, they're thinking about what are the ways that the workout is actually becoming more accessible to me, because our workout is pretty challenging, in order to allow me a sort of smoother on-ramp into the solidcore community. So we're doing some work around that. And then across all elements of the spectrum, people are saying, great, I love the way that I feel when I come out of a solidcore class. I feel accomplished. I feel like I did something really challenging. But how does that translate into what is actually happening in my body? And that goes down the path of some of the digital components and sort of the metrics and stats and some of the science behind the workout that we're starting to lean into even more starting this year. But I think for the sort of the foreseeable future, solidcore will be solidcore on a reformer in a room, immersive experience, and no external sort of new modalities.
We'll have to wait and see. It sounds like how the tech, the data, personalization, maybe how that all plays out. So I'm super interested to see what that looks like when you are ready to announce it. That then leads into, you're talking about, hey, how does this impact me? And then what is my experience like after I leave the studio, from nutrition to recovery to apparel to you name it, with solidcore continuing to focus on what it does well? How do you think about then partnerships within that kind of ecosystem, and then how you engage people, who you select, and then how do you build out that experience?
Solid core strives in its category to be best of breed at what we do. And we take that as a sort of mantra as we think about partners as well. And so you're right, Joe, we are thinking about those things that our consumer is doing within the wellness ecosystem that are not solid core, right? So they are thinking about what they're putting into their body from a nutrition standpoint. They're thinking about the ways that they're recovering and sort of, stretching, or thinking about injury recovery and relief, et cetera. And so when we are contemplating how we continue to build value within the solid core ecosystem, we view partnerships as a really, really critical lens, or a really, really sort of critical outlet to be able to do that. And so we launched something more than a year ago now called the Core Collective. And the Core Collective was this sort of moment where we were saying to our consumers, we know that there are amazing brands that are best of breed in what they do. And we want to, as a benefit of you being a part of the solid core ecosystem, give you privileged access to those brands where you are likely to be spending your dollars, or where you may be thinking about spending your time, energy, and effort. And so we've sort of built a small ecosystem of brands in that core collective today that cover, again, like how you prep for your workout, how you fuel up for your workout, how you recover on the other side. But we will continue to invest in that ecosystem of partnerships that, again, are best in breed. And so when we think about, again, your question of sort of how do you pick which ones, how do you select in a massive sort of sea of brands that are out there, it really is saying, what is our consumer wanting to do within the wellness ecosystem, and truly who is best of breed within that sphere? And let's go figure out how we build a relationship with them and get them into our core collective.
Yeah. One of the things that you're just naturally benefiting from is this, as consumers start to think about longevity and strength training and muscle mass and health span, all these kind of buzzwords. It's like, well, that is naturally built into the solid core and reformer experience. So it's somewhat right place, right time. But then it's also a matter of like, okay, what do we need to do differently to show up that way for people who maybe don't think those things when they think about solid core, or previously thought, hey, this, my friends, or word of mouth, this is a super challenging workout. You go, it's, like you said, the muscle shaking. Well, okay, how does that translate to longevity or health span or muscle mass, those sorts of things? How have some of those trends like changed, whether it's the programming, the marketing, or just anything as you're thinking about how it comes across to consumers?
We are thinking about this a lot in the way that we go to market, right? So to your point, there's a whole set of consumers that are out there who are, for one reason or another, not considering solid core as a place for them. On one side, it might be, I know exactly what solid core is, but all I hear about is it's so challenging. On the other hand, there's people who are like, I have no idea what solid core is. I have no idea why that would be important as I think about longevity, strength, etc. And we are working to solve both of those ends and everything in between. And so a few things that I would just sort of highlight on the front side, sort of the idea that there are people who are thinking about this and the workout being too challenging. We are thinking a lot about how we create formats that are onboarding ramps for folks who are coming into the solid core experience, because for some people, the challenge is actually just the level of, what I call the level of overwhelm that you experience walking into the solid core workout. You're on a reformer. A lot of people haven't been on a reformer before. You're in a dark room. It feels a little bit disorienting the first time. The music is elevated, the coaching is energetic. And so we're thinking about ways that we can massage those elements. Again, bringing the music volume down, making the coaching a little bit more clear for a newcomer, brightening the light so that it's just a little bit less disorienting for the first timer, and really thinking about how we create that on-ramp. But really importantly, the on-ramp is something that's always been on our radar. The thing that we're thinking a lot about now is that they're actually our new partners at L Catterton say this a lot, right? Like there's like, when you're driving down the highway, there are multiple lanes, right? There are people who are like fast lane drivers. That's me, going usually 10 over the speed limit. And then there are people who are like far right lane. They're driving a little bit slower. They're maybe a little bit nervous. And there are people in the middle. And there are people who, depending on what they're feeling over the course of their journey, they might toggle up, toggle down. And there are people who stay in their lane, whichever lane that they pick. And I think one of the things that we're thinking a lot about is like, how do we actually create programming that maps to those who actually want to stay in the lane that they pick, as opposed to assuming that everyone wants to eventually get to the fast lane, which has been a sort of our historical sort of archetype. And on the other side, for folks who have never considered solid core, who may not know why it matters, we're doing a lot of work on the influencer side. And we're doing sort of the micro influencers, the people who are kind of in your community who you really relate to. And then we're also starting to experiment into some macro influencers, right? So we have some folks who might be models. We have some folks who are professional athletes. We're particularly thinking about men and targeting males because for whatever reason, reformer workouts have a female connotation within our society, despite the fact that Pilates was invented by a man. And so we're thinking about things on both sides, and those are just two examples. But you're right, there's a massive white space opportunity here for people to continue to join the fold as these sort of tailwinds of longevity and strength training propel our brand and our category.
This episode of the Fitt Insider Podcast is brought to you by EGYM. EGYM makes some of the most innovative strength training machines on the market, but that's only one part of their integrated ecosystem. With connected fitness equipment, AI-powered gym software, and a comprehensive corporate wellness offering, it's forging the future of preventative health. Partnering with companies worldwide, EGYM's WellPass program improves employee health by expanding access to premier fitness and health facilities. Upgrading gym floors, EGYM equips every operator with smart equipment and AI tools to create hyper-personalized training plans for every exerciser. Putting it all together, they're transforming healthcare through exercise. Experience the power of EGYM's ecosystem at egym.com. Yeah, that's really well said. There's also this element of whether it is models or athletes, kind of like macro celebrity stars, or just everyday individuals, Pilates has reached this point where it's like definitely mainstream to the extent of like again, this isn't new. This has been around since, the early 1900s, but now really breaking through as like a modern solution to all these things that we're thinking about now. And in some ways, like, yes, there are a lot of other kind of concepts or brands who are doing Pilates-esque workouts. So quote unquote competition, right? And then to some extent, there's reformers and Pilates classes of becoming like a expected amenity at like health clubs and some luxury hospitality and like social wellness membership clubs. That's making it one, rising tide lifts all ships. So people know about it and they're equating that to what solidcore is doing. But then it's also, hey, what are all these different versions and which one's right for me and how do I decide? Have you, beyond the like which lane do people fall in, have you started to think about like, hey, how do we continue to carve out what solid core means relative to this growing awareness to the benefit of Pilates?
Mm-hmm. So we've thought a lot about this, right? Because the great thing about success is that you're successful. The downside of success is that you have a lot of people who want to come and take a share of your success, right? And so we think a lot about what makes solid core unique and how we continue to lean in on those things that make us unique. And there are really two things that there are lots of things that make solid core special, but there are two things that I would highlight that we think a lot about. The first is this idea of effectiveness, right? The thing that people talk about the most when they talk about solid core is the level of challenge. Now, that's a double-edged sword, right? Because challenge keeps people coming back and really motivates people who are in the community, but challenge can also be intimidating. So like that goes back to the lanes. But when we think about effectiveness as a moat, people want to feel like they're getting their sort of dollars worth, certainly, right? Fitness is not inexpensive. And most importantly, I always talk about like people want to feel like they're getting their time worth because like you can walk down the street and find $20, $30, $40, whatever the class cost. You will never get the 50 minutes back that you spend in a solid core class. And so like, how do we make sure that that was actually worth your while? And so our team spends tons of time thinking about all of the various touch points within the class experience that make the workout that much more effective, and how do we continue to improve those by 1% each day? Like we focus a lot on connection and accountability. The connection that you have with your coach that's in there actually saying, Joe, I'm going to make this manual adjustment to you, this hands-on correction to your form that's actually going to get you a little bit more effectiveness, or that says your name with something that you're doing where you're like, oh, the coach actually sees me. So like, I really kind of want to take a break. I don't really need one, but I really want one. But instead, because I know the coach sees me, I'm not going to take a break. So like those like little tweaks to the experience are really, really important from an effectiveness standpoint. The other thing is like, how do we make sure that the workout is really sustainable to create effectiveness over time? So we think about the pain points that we hear from clients who have been in the community for a really long time, right? Solid core can be intense on the shoulders. There are elements of solid core that can be intense on the wrists. And so we're thinking about innovation in ways that protect those parts of the body that allow you to stay with the program for as long as you want. And so it's like those elements of effectiveness that we think a lot about to continue to build that effectiveness moat. And then on the other side is community. People really value the connection, the shared camaraderie, frankly, the pride that they get in being a part of Solid Core and what Solid Core stands for. And so there are tons of ways that we think about this. Again, I'll highlight just a couple. One is that connection between coach and client. In a lot of premium boutique fitness, coaches or instructors are placed on a pedestal. They're sort of celebritized. We've actually taken the very opposite approach here at Solid Core, right? We want your coach to be relatable. They should be the ones who are greeting you when you come into the room. Again, they're learning your names. They're providing you with hands-on corrections. There's a humility to the brand, and that sort of creates a deeper and more authentic connection between coach and client that makes people feel instantly like they're actually a part of something, as opposed to it feeling like a clique that you have to break into. And then the other thing that we think about from a community standpoint is being able to rep your community, right? So we have this like new sort of thing that we're talking about with respect to our merch. And it's that Solid Core merch can't just be bought, it has to be earned. And that's because if you walk into a Solid Core studio, we don't sell merch there. And if you go online, we sell a little bit of merch, but not much. And we've actually been doing these limited edition drops that clients can earn by exhibiting certain behavior in their Solid Core experience. And so when you walk into a room and you see someone wearing Solid Core socks, you know that they participated in our challenge in 2024. And in about a month, when you walk into a Solid Core studio and you see people wearing a brand new Solid Core hoodie, you know that they took 10 classes in the first 2 weeks of December. And there's this element of pride and connection and community that comes from things like that, that again, make people feel like they're a part of something that's bigger than just themselves.
You know, listening to you talk and thinking about even how you opened the, conversation to some extent, it was like, hey, look, there's not going to be a whole lot that is that much different from what we're doing. But then as you continue to explain it, it's like everything is different. It's a degree different. It's a tweak. It's this. It's all of these things that maybe members don't even necessarily notice every little thing that you're doing, but really you and the team are obsessing over every touch point, over the onboarding, over the lanes, over, hey, how does this feel on my wrist? Hey, how am I getting my merch? And like those things really distinguish not only where you are in the phase of the business, right? There's this proving out phase and, hey, are we going to survive? And does anybody like it? And can we open 10 studios? Can we open 100 studios? But then it's like really uncharted territory to some extent, which is like, how do we dial this thing in a way that nobody has done this particular thing on a Pilates reformer in this environment, really ever before. So you're really charting that territory. How are you talking about this, like with the team? Like, how, like, take us inside that, because it's again, it's like that non-obvious thing to be like, hey, you could just be like, this is good enough. We've made it to some extent, and like, let's spin out as many of these studios as we can and just keep cranking members through the door. But like, there's a whole other level of thoughtfulness and really obsession with it. That's like, no, this is what it looks like. Your definition, the team's definition of success.
One thing that we talk about amongst our leadership team, Joe, that I would just bring up kind of in the context of this particular discussion is, and I hate to say this, but it is the truth. Our industry, the boutique fitness industry, has a bad reputation amongst investors. And the reason that the boutique fitness industry has a bad reputation amongst investors is because as you look back historically, there have been amazing brands that have gotten to a level of success, national prominence, and notoriety, but there hasn't been a single premium boutique fitness brand that has actually been able to sustain that over a consistent period of time. And that's obviously very challenging for an investor who's thinking about investing in something, holding it for an extended period of time, and ultimately getting a return. And so when I think about success at solidcore, I think about it in two ways. One is, how do we impact and change people's lives? So right now, as I talk to the team, we talk about this like, the company's been around for about 11 years. And so we talk about the fact that it took us 10 years to reach 1 million unique people. And our goal for the next 10 years is to reach 10 million unique people. So to 10x the impact over the same period of time. So like there's that impact that we want to have. But then there's also a broader industry impact that we are like really chomping at the bit to have. And that is to change this reputation. That is to be the brand that in an investor meeting, when someone else is going out to raise money, instead of going, solidcore was really, really great and then crashed and burned, I want them to be able to say, solidcore was really, really great and was able to maintain that greatness over an extended period of time. And we can do the same. And that's why you should invest in our business. And when I think about companies, particularly in the consumer space, that have done that, right? Like if you think about iconic consumer companies, they may have had challenging periods, Apple, Nike, etc. They may have had challenging periods, but the thing that they do the most is they obsess over the consumer and what the consumer wants, what the consumer needs, and frankly, sometimes what the consumer wants or needs that they may not even yet know they want or need. And that is the discipline that we bring into our leadership team meetings. And when I think about hiring people across our leadership team, regardless of your function, that is the headset that will indicate that you are the right fit for solidcore. You have a deep, deep, deep obsession of just improving every single day on behalf of the customer, consumer, and never feeling like where we are is good enough.
You're dialed. Like it's all very dialed, and the bar is set incredibly high, and rightfully so. Like when you're talking about the goals and the impact that you want to have, and what it's taken to get to this point, but also what it's going to take to get to where you want to go. It sets a very high standard in a good way.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think a lot about as a leader here is that solidcore for a long time was the underdog. We were I always joke, we were like the younger brother who like wants everyone to be like, we're cool too, because transparently, and this is like, really silly now in hindsight, but if I go back 5 years at this company, when people would talk about boutique fitness, they wouldn't talk about solidcore. They would talk about SoulCycle and Berries and Orange Theory and Rumble. And we would always, again, be in the corner like, why is no one mentioning us? Like we have 50 studios, or I think we had 70 studios when you and I talked back in 2021. But things are different now. And things are different in ways that are amazing, right? The company has, had tremendous success over the last several years, and I'm really proud of our team and what we've built. But what I don't want to lose is that feeling of being the underdog and that feeling of being like, we're going to keep working really hard until someone recognizes us. And now, just because people do mention solidcore early in the conversation, when the conversation of boutique fitness comes up, doesn't mean we can let our foot off the gas. And like, that's the energy that you feel from me, is that like, we can never allow our success to be the thing that actually drives us to failure.
And I also think, thinking back to that conversation, the way in which you're articulating that is abundantly clear. That it's like you've been able to put the right words to maybe where it was at that time and the growth that you've had since then, but also where you want to go. And so going from like, it would be great if we were included in the conversation we want to be, to we are now setting the pace for what this will become, is a much different, feeling, I'm sure, but also opportunity to really dictate, as you say, both from the impact perspective, from an outcome perspective in terms of investors, and really the longevity and viability of boutique studios. Yeah, it's certainly a great spot to be in, and exciting to be able to, uphold that standard. Coming full circle from like talking about L Catterton getting involved to the private equity kind of capitalization of a business, like what does that mean in terms of growth, outcomes, transactions? Like, is it building so that L Catterton at some point, whatever that timetable is, can get their return? Is it getting to an increasing profitability and making that sustainable? How do you think about like that? What does that plan look like?
It's a fantastic question. I will say when I think about outcomes, I try not to lead with the investor lens. And the reason that I try not to lead with the investor lens is because I think when you lead with the lens of we need to get to XYZ exit event, it changes the way that the team behaves. It changes the way that the team actually views your behavior as a leader in ways that I personally just don't believe are positive for the business. And so I always start with impact, right? If we can build a sustainable business that is serving a consumer's unmet need better than anyone else in our category, then the rest will follow, right? We will do that. That will mean that we will have the permission to enter new communities, both domestically and abroad. That will mean that our revenues will grow. That will mean that we will create sustainable profitability, both at the unit level, but also at the corporate level. And in the end, after you do all of that, that will also mean that our investor partners will be incredibly happy with the outcome that they get when they ultimately feel it's time for them to exit their stake in this business. And typically private equity sort of timeframes are kind of 4 to 7 years. And that's no different than what I would expect with our relationship with Catterton. But as I think about the next 4 to 7 years, I'm not thinking about it through the lens of when I get to 4 years, that's the end of the finish line. It's like, that's just another sort of milestone in the hopefully very, 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 very long journey that is the lifespan of solidcore as a business.
For folks that want to follow along and see where you're going to show up next in terms of locations, what this tech integration is that I'm wondering about now, and just generally want to keep up with solidcore, where would you point them?
I would point you first and foremost to our website, www.solidcore.co, no M on the .co. I would also have you check out our Instagram, which is just @solidcore. And then if you want to keep up with me personally, I also post a fair amount about solidcore, when I'm taking class, where I'm traveling or coaching. Follow me at BeMySoFly on Instagram.
We will link everything up, make sure it's easy to find, and super excited to share the latest conversation. Really appreciate you stopping by again.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you got value from the conversation, please consider subscribing and sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It's a massive help. And if you want more content like this, including news and insights on the latest industry developments, subscribe to the Fitt Insider newsletter at insider.fit.co. And one more thing, you can learn more about our recruiting and consulting services at fit.co. That's FITT.co. I'll see you here next week.